last week we completed Catch the Clown with add-ons. So we basically took our base tutorial for Catch the Clown and then turned it into a 3-level game with scoring mechanisms, additional roadblocks, a high score table, title screen, and some other barriers that actually prevent us from achieving the objective, which is to obtain the highest score possible. The first thing we'll review is what we did with the sprites. So we started with our regular clown, and then in order to get these the death clown and our evil clowns, all we ended up having to do is to right click and duplicate those sprites, and then we were able to click on any of them, do edit sprite, and we could manipulate the appearance of it however we pleased. And when it came to our death clown, we do edit sprite and then transform and then stretch, and that allows us to alter the size of it. And if we were to uncheck this keep aspect ratio, then we could manipulate the pixels however we wanted to. But with this checked, it's going to keep whatever the initial aspect was. So since it was 32 by 32 prior, we basically just doubled the size and still kept the same aspect ratio. One of the other things that were useful to us is we downloaded some additional music, and we wanted to make sure that they were in MIDI form because that's what we want to use anytime we do music. Sound effects, you could have had the opportunity to download any other wave files from the resources that I had posted on announcements. And what we did with each different sound file is we attached it to a different clown object. So as we went into our different object clowns, you notice we had a different clown for each level. And then in the create event for each one, we adjusted which sound file they were going to be playing. So the first level clown played the original sound file, 2 played the second music that I downloaded, and the third clown played the third one that I downloaded. And we just did that by duplicating each clown object, again, right click duplicate, and we only had to change one action in order to change the background music. Some of the other things that we changed with the object clowns had to do with their scoring and what happened when you clicked on them. So originally the object clown, all he did is just he'd spawn in a random spot and give you 10 points when you use left press. What we did this time is we did a create instance action right up here. And now if he's clicked, it's going to create an instance of that object evil clown. And we could do that to any number of sprites. I know some of you had different clowns, or like different variants of evil clowns in your game, depending upon the level, and you just adjust that based upon which object you wanted to appear with that click. With the evil clown, we were able to duplicate from the original object clown. We reassigned the sprite that we wanted to show up, and then the only item we really needed to change here was that set score. Now, for the original clown, it was just set score 10 and relative, so it would add 10 every time you clicked. With the evil clown, we changed that to a value of -5 and relative. If this box remained unchecked, then it would just set a score at -5, or in some cases, GameMaker 8, I think, allows you to go negative. That might be GameMaker Studio, but it would just set the score at whatever the value was, and it would keep it there until you click the object clown to go back up. But by checking relative, it just decreased the score by a value of 5 every time. With our death clown, or our boss, is he has no score mechanism to him. It's basically just play the game as long as you can until you click him. And the 2 actions we had triggered from the left pressed event was, number 1, we had to show the high score table, and then an end game action, which would shut the game down after you hit escape from the high score table. If these 2 were flipped, then the high score table would never show up. You have to make sure that whatever you want to pop up occurs before the end game. So later on, if it's to take you to a particular room, an end screen, it's going to have to be the first item on the action. Or if it's a sound effect, it's going to have to be one of the first items on the action before the end game action. Because once this is dragged up to number 1, it's just going to end the game, and whatever you want to happen thereafter will not occur. We created some things called controllers. They're basically objects that we don't interact with necessarily, but we place them in our game to, sometimes it might be score functions, sometimes it might be live functions, sometimes it might be sound effects. But we did create 3 of them in this. One in our title screen. You can see that question mark just means it doesn't have a sprite assigned to that controller. And so with that object start, we just placed it in our first room, and with a key strike of the spacebar, it would advance us to the next room. With our first level controller, we did a step event and then a test score, which would mean that once you hit a certain score, in this case we did larger than 59 because we wanted to set 60 as the parameter, then something else is going to happen. So in this case, we said when the score is larger than 59, you will go to the next room if one exists. In this case, we did have a next room, so that it is going to go to the next room. If we would have somehow put this in the final room, and let's say we put this at the end of level 3, whatever the score was, and we did create a level 4, then that's when an error message is going to pop up. So some things we might do later on is this check next. What check next does is we would drag it right up here, and then it states, if the next room exists, it will go to the next room. If no next room exists, then it would just end the game, or you'd stay at the current level, or bring up a high score table. But it would eliminate that error message that you might get if you ever add the next room, but you don't have one that follows whatever level you're on. So that's something we might use in the future. Our other score controller we put in the second level, and it was the same event and actions, except we just altered that score value. In this case, we said once we get larger than 119, we would advance to the next room. Some other items we experimented with included creating your own background or your own title screen. So we created this in PowerPoint, and then we needed to make sure that we exported it as a JPEG or saved it as a JPEG, because if you just save it as a PowerPoint, that's not functional in GameMaker. And when we loaded that in, we did edit background, and you'll be doing this a lot throughout the semester. Edit background, transform, and then stretch. Some of you might have done resize or scale, and it cut off part of your room. That's why stretch is such an important thing here. It just condenses or expands whatever you have created. And so we set our size that we wanted, 640 by 360 for that background. And then when we went to our title screen, we went into the settings tab and we changed our width and height so it matched what we set that background at. Allows everything to show up. If at any point you have a piece of your room that is cut off, maybe you don't see this bottom row of boxes, then there are a couple things you're going to want to check. You need to make sure that your room height and width, so some of us might have done 360 right here, and that didn't quite look right. Also, views. Some of you went into views and you altered what the view is going to be, and that will cut things off as well. We'll be dealing with views in tutorial 2, so that way we don't see the entire room right away. We only see a portion of the room. We set it to follow a particular object. That's our summary of the Catch the Clown with add-ons. To recap, we dealt with duplicating sprites and editing sprites. We downloaded and inserted music files that we got off the internet. We were able to export a background that we created in PowerPoint as an image and insert that into GameMaker and then edit that background to a certain size. We duplicated some objects and established some different actions based upon what we clicked, and that would include different set scores, like setting the score negative to something. Sorry, let's go to the setting the scores negative to a relative, and also bringing up the high score table. And we dove into controllers for the first time, those non-playable objects that impact gameplay. They're kind of like the brains behind the game. They make things happen that we don't necessarily control with a click or with our in-game actions. And we duplicated some levels and did some level design as well.